Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a video about network tools. In this video, well, you guessed it, we're going to take a look at some network tools. Here I have a list of a number of different tools that you may come across as a network administrator. Now, I want to tell you that as we go down through this list, I am going to show you what a number of these tools look like, or I'll say can look like. But please understand that there is no one look to any given tool. There's many different manufacturers, different makes, different models. But I want you to have the general idea of what the tool does. So first we have our cable strippers. Now cable strippers are used to strip off the outer insulation of a cable when getting it ready for a connector. So in other words, if you have a cable and you need to put a connector on the end of it, well, you can't just like snap it on. There's a process involved. And the first step in that process tends to be stripping off the outer insulation so you can get down to the bare wire. So just to give you an idea, here's an example of a pretty simplistic cable stripper. And you may notice that right in here there's a number of different holes, or you can see kind of the half arc here, and there's different sizes, and well, those are for the different sized cables. What you would do is you would open this up, you would slide your cable into one of the openings. Now you can't really see it, but right along here is a blade. Okay, and what you're going to do is once you slip the cable in, you put your finger in here and then you wind it round and round and round and round and round the cable until you've stripped off that outer insulation. So that's quite simply what a cable stripper does. Now snips, well, this is probably the simplest tool in this entire video. Snips are used to cut cables. So as you can see here, they look pretty much just like wire cutters, or really they are. That's what snips are. They're wire cutters. They're used to cut cables. Next we have crimpers. Now crimpers are used to attach a connector to the end of a cable. So very often you will use a crimper along with the cable strippers. Okay, because the cable stripper will go ahead and strip off the insulation so that you then have bare wires to put into a connector, and then the crimper is what will truly attach the connector onto the cable. Now here I have an example of an RJ45, or actually this particular one can do either RJ45 or RJ11. So pretty much this is your standard Ethernet type crimper. And you might notice that right around here, you can kind of tell, it's kind of hard to tell at this angle, but it's kind of like an RJ45 jack. And it is. Because what you would do is once you slide the wires into the RJ45 connector, you would then take the cable and the connector and you would put it into that hole, at which point you take this handle and you go ahead and squeeze it tight, and usually there's a click or a snap of some kind that you will hear. Some crimpers actually won't even release. They won't allow the handle to open back up again until you've compressed it down all the way. And that then compresses the connector into the cable. And basically in the case of an RJ45 connector, there's tiny little teeth that are on the inside, and when you pinch it together, those teeth go into the wires and then also pinch down on the outer insulation of the remaining part of the cable. Now I mentioned a moment ago that crimpers will very often be used with cable strippers, and for that reason very often you will find a tool which is both a crimper and a wire stripper in one. Now in the case of this particular one, I don't know if you can see, but right here there's a blade, and that blade can be used to strip a cable. Now personally, I like to go with a regular wire stripper for the purposes of stripping, and then use the crimper for what it was truly designed for, which is crimping. But if you just want to go out and get the one tool, very often you can get a combo tool like this. Now the next tool we have here is something called the punch down tool. And a punch down tool is used to connect wire to a punch down block. Wow, thanks, Ed. That really helps. Well, that's why I showed you not just a picture of the tool itself, but a number of videos back we learned about some of our different wiring blocks. This right here is a picture of something called a 66 block. And as you can see here, there's a lot of tiny little wires that go into these tiny little slots, these tiny little holes in this 66 block over here. Well, this tool is used to go ahead and pop those wires into those slots. And basically, it actually performs somewhat of a dual role. What it will do is it will take a wire, and as you attach the wire to the end here, or really what you do is you kind of lay the wire over the hole, and then you use this end to pop the wire in. Well, it also strips the wire down to the bare metal as it snaps it in. And very often there is a snap or a click of some kind to let you know that you successfully punched the wire into the punch down block. Alright, next we have our cable testers and certifiers. And you'll notice here that I don't have any pictures. And that's because, well, there really is no one picture that would represent either one of these. What I want you to know is what this particular tool, or in this case these particular tools, do. And a cable tester is used to test whether a cable is working properly. Kind of makes sense, right? That's exactly what it is. A cable tester is used to see if the cable's working, to see if you've got a bum cable. Now, very often the cable tester will be used right after you have added a connector to it. So maybe you have a standard twisted pair Ethernet cable, and you want to make your own, right? Not one that you just go out and buy at the store. You want to make your own, and so you take the wires and you strip down to them, and then you put them in your RJ45 jack and you crimp it together, and then you do the same thing for the other end. Well, the next step would be to then put the cable into a cable tester to prove whether you have built that cable successfully. Now, a certifier is used to test and validate whether a cable is ready to handle certain levels of throughput. Okay, so a certifier can certify that a cable is going to be able to handle a certain maximum level. For instance, would be maybe you're currently using standard 100 megabit Ethernet on your network and you're thinking about upgrading to gigabit Ethernet. Well, the certifier can be used to certify whether your cables are going to be ready for gigabit Ethernet communications. Now, next we have the TDR and the OTDR. And really, they're kind of the same thing. TDR stands for Time Domain Reflectometer. Or as a friend of mine used to say, Reflectometer. I don't really care how you pronounce it, but a time domain reflectometer or reflectometer or whatever you want to say, a TDR, is used to check the continuity of a copper cable. Whereas an OTDR is an optical time domain reflectometer, and it is used to check the continuity of fiber optic cable. Kind of makes sense, right? Now here's the cool thing. This is where these tools are typically used. Both the TDR and the OTDR can be used to help locate where there's a break in the cable. So it's not so much to locate when there's a break in the cable. It will do that, right? Because it's going to check the continuity of the cable. But it can actually help you locate where there's a break, or sometimes even where there's a crimp in a cable. Now when we say a crimp, I don't mean like the crimping tool that we just saw a little while ago where you crimp it right onto a connector. But if you think about the concept of crimping where you're pinching down on a cable, well, I've seen where cables are run and then maybe the leg of a table or some piece of heavy furniture or something that's behind the walls where you can't see it, something has now pinched down on a cable. That's crimping it. That's crimping it in a bad way where we don't want it to be crimped. And that crimp can either destroy a signal or deteriorate a signal, and the TDRs and the OTDRs can help locate where that crimp, or again if it's a full-blown break, where that break is located. And that can come in really handy, especially when you're dealing with cables that are not visible, meaning you cannot see the entire cable. The cable's been run behind a wall, or maybe it's going over a drop ceiling or under a raised floor. Well, rather than trying to get up in that raised ceiling or lift up the whole floor and look underneath, you might be able to just go ahead and use this tool to recognize, oh, hey, look, it's about 20 feet away from where I'm at right now. And then you only have to open up panels in that area and look and see what's going on with the cable. Now next here we have something called the toner probe. Now a toner probe is used to locate the end of a cable. Now that definition by itself is going to be kind of confusing, so I'll explain in a moment. But I want you to know that it's technically made up of two components: a tone generator and then the probe. And the way this works is you would take one end of a cable and you would hook it up to the tone generator. Then what you can do is take the probe and start probing around for where the other end of that cable is. And again, might not make a whole lot of sense, so let me give you a typical scenario. A typical scenario where you would use this would be when you have maybe an Ethernet jack in an office, but it hasn't been properly labeled, right? It's just an RJ45 jack in the wall, and you know, or you believe that that wire goes somewhere right behind the wall. You believe that there is cable, and that is taking you off to what's usually some form of a patch panel. But you go into the room where the patch panel is, and then you end up with, 100 different wires all kind of put together. And you want to figure out which wire is the one that goes to that office. Well, what you do is you go ahead and you plug the tone generator into the RJ45 jack in the wall in the office, and then you would go to the room where the patch panel is and you start moving the probe around to different wires, and possibly sometimes even different ports. Sometimes they come where you can actually plug into the different ports until you find the one that's actually giving a signal. Now this can save you a ton of time. I'll tell you, this is a very, very handy tool, because I personally have had to do that exact scenario but without a toner probe. And what that meant was that basically I had to plug in a computer, plug in something live into the jack in the office, and then I had to go into the patch panel room and had to start plugging into the different ports until I figure out which one it is. Or sometimes it takes two people. You have one in one room, one in the other, and you start plugging in and unplugging, and then you yell to the other person. I think you get the idea. It gets really crazy. So the toner probe can really help you to eliminate all that extra time, all that extra manpower needed to just simply figure out where a cable is located. Now I will tell you that another way that you can avoid this whole problem is with really good labeling. And I will tell you, if you ever walk into a new office, or I'll say an office that's new to you, not necessarily a brand newly built office. For instance, I moved into a new office once where another company was already there, and there was probably about 30 or 40, maybe even 50 cables coming out of a patch panel room going out to all sorts of different offices. And the very first thing I did, rather than just try to figure out, well, here's a couple that I need. No, I went through and I figured out where all 50 of those cables went. And then I labeled all 50 of those cables, and I labeled all 50 of those ports. And now that everything's properly labeled, well, I don't need to worry about probing for where a cable goes. I'll know it. It's labeled. But the toner probe still comes in handy in case a label disappears. Next we have our voltage event recorder. And this is a tool that is used to monitor the quality of power coming out from a wall outlet. And as you can see here, this particular tool has a regular plug that you would just plug right into a standard wall outlet. And then the other half of the device would be used to gather information coming from that outlet. And the reason you would use this is to test an outlet to see if it really has a standard consistent flow of electricity coming to it, or maybe there's a lot of surges that are coming to it that would possibly destroy your equipment. So this is actually a nifty little tool that you would use before plugging in any really sensitive equipment that might be subject to surges, or possibly even the other direction. It could be a lot of dips in power. You don't want to plug a server in and then have all these dips in power, and even if you had a backup battery plugged in, well, that battery might end up little by little just starting to get deteriorated because the wall outlet has this regular dip in power and the batteries are constantly being used and recharged and cycled and worn out. Alright, next we have the multimeter, and I will tell you that although I do have a picture of a multimeter on the screen, there is, again, there's a ton of different multimeters that are out there. And you'll also notice here that I'll tell you that a multimeter is used to test a variety of information about cables, connectors, and outlets. In other words, a multimeter is just that. It's a meter for multiple things. So multimeters have a number of different settings, thus the dial that you see here. But typically you will end up having 2 or sometimes 3 probes that you'll plug into different holes on the multimeter, depending on exactly what it is you're trying to measure. And then you'll have some form of readout that will give you a result of whatever it is that you are looking for. And I will tell you that a multimeter can perform some of the functions that we've already talked about with other tools. So it's just kind of a generic kind of catch-all tool that can do a number of different things, but yet at the same time doesn't really specialize in any of them. Alright, this takes us into the last few tools that I want to talk about. And again, you'll notice that I don't have any pictures here because, well, again, there is no one specific picture. I would say, if anything, the butt set is actually the one that I could show you a picture of, and we'll talk about it in just a moment, and I'll explain, and I'm sure you can picture exactly what it is. You've probably seen one before. But anyway, starting off here at the top, Protocol Analyzer. Well, the Protocol Analyzer is just what it sounds like. It's used to analyze network protocols. What it does is it looks to see how much of a certain protocol, or really it's not even just how much, but what type of data is being transmitted and breaks in. And it really, it's almost a form of packet sniffer, which is something that we're going to talk about in the next video. But it actually takes a look at the data and then looks to see what protocol is being used. And so this is how you can help analyze what protocols are traveling on what areas of the network. Now, a temperature monitor is almost exactly what it sounds like. It monitors temperature, or usually it'll monitor temperature and humidity, and where we typically would use it would be in a server room. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, isn't that just a thermometer? Well, it is basically. It's a thermometer. And I guess technically it's a thermometer and then also a humidistat. Or really we could say it's a thermostat and a humidistat. And what it does is, if there's some kind of extreme spike in one direction or the other of either temperature or humidity, then it will alert. And there's many different types of these monitors and many different types of alerts that can be used to alert an administrator of these changes. So that's what the temperature monitor is, and it's one thing you really need to keep in mind, is that especially in a server room, you need to keep a consistent cool temperature to help keep those servers running efficiently. And then finally, and how appropriate is this, that we're going to end with, well, somewhat of the rear end. No, not really rear end, but the butt set. What is a butt set? Well, a butt set is used to allow an administrator to butt in, thus the name, to a communication line. And the most typical one that you would see out there is one that would be used by a telecommunications administrator. You may have even seen, although I will say it's not nearly as common today as it was years ago, you may have seen a telephone repair person come out, and what they did was they had what looked like just a telephone, a handset, and then some wires coming from that handset. And then they just kind of plugged that handset in to the line. so that they can listen in to see what's happening on the line. So that's what a butt set is. It just kind of allows you to butt in or tap in to the line to see what's going on with communication on that line. So that's a number of different network tools that you could come in contact with and that you'll need to be familiar with for the Network Plus certification exam. And at this point, you should be able to describe what some of these tools are and, well, when you would use them. That's all I got for you in this video. I'll see you in the next one.